Hi, I'm Leela.
I remember the first time someone told me I'd never be worth anything. I was 16, standing in the middle of a high school hallway lined with peeling paint and the echoes of laughter that didn't belong to me. My backpack had split open, scattering books and pens across the floor, and as I crouched down to collect them, I heard the voice I'd never forget. Deep, careless, and sharp like broken glass. Why do you even try, Lila? No one's ever gonna care what you do. He didn't laugh when he said it. That's what made it worse. He meant it. His eyes were flat, his mouth a hard line. Then he turned and walked away. He didn't even know that his words followed me home, followed me into my sleep, followed me into the mirror each morning. He was just a boy with a popular crowd behind him and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. His name was Mason. That hallway moment should have been nothing. Just another bad day and a string of quiet humiliations. But something about the way he said it stuck. I never told anyone. Not my mom, who was too tired from work to notice, or my sister, who had started calling me melodramatic every time I mentioned feeling invisible. Back then, I thought the world would change for me if I just worked harder, if I just made myself useful enough. I carried groceries without being asked, memorized test material until my eyes blurred, and nodded quietly when teachers confused me with someone else. I thought if I became good enough, someone would finally see me. But all it did was make me smaller. Our house wasn't much. A narrow rental on the south side of town, where the walls were too thin and the heaters clicked in winter like they were about to quit. My mom worked as a nurse assistant, night shifts mostly, and my stepdad, Gary, bounced between jobs and moods. Some days he'd be fine, half joking, watching TV with a can of beer like a parody of a sitcom dad. Other days, he'd slam cupboards because someone left a dish in the sink. Mostly, I avoided him. After school, I'd go to the library and sit between the rows, pretending to study even when my head ached from how loud my thoughts were. The only place I felt peace was on the roof above my room. I'd crawl out the window and lie flat on the shingles, headphones in, the stars blurry through the smog. I used to wonder if life would always feel like waiting for something that never showed up. Mason wasn't even part of my world, really. He drove a black car with tinted windows and dated girls who wore lip gloss and chewed gum like it was currency. His father owned half the real estate in our county, and Mason already talked about networking like it was a bloodline. The funny thing is, I don't think he even hated me. He just didn't think I mattered. That kind of dismissal cuts deeper than cruelty. After high school, I didn't have a graduation party. I didn't get a big send-off. My stepdad handed me a brochure for the local community college and said, "Don't expect us to pay for any of it." I nodded and got a job waitressing at a diner near the highway. I took night classes, studied business because it sounded safe. Customers would sometimes ask what I wanted to do with my life, and I'd smile and say I was still figuring it out. What I really wanted was to never need to answer that question again. It was during one of those shifts, midnight coffee refills for truckers, that I met someone who saw more in me than I saw in myself. Her name was Rena. She was a regular, always sitting in the corner booth with her laptop, drinking tea like it was sacred. I'd noticed her before. She was sharp-looking, always dressed like she had somewhere important to be. One night, she called me over and asked me a strange question. "Do you know how to organize information?" I blinked, confused, but nodded. "I do most of the inventory here," I said. "Schedules, too." She watched me for a second, then said, "You're wasted in this place." I didn't believe her, of course. But she left me a card with her name, Rena Hale, tech consultant, and said she might have a project for me. I almost threw it away. But something about her calm confidence made me hold on to it. A week later, I called her. That's when everything started to change. The project was simple at first, data entry for a startup she was helping build. I worked from my laptop in the tiny corner of my room between my dresser and the wall. It paid better than the diner, and more importantly, she didn't treat me like I was disposable. She explained things clearly. She asked for my opinion. Over time, she gave me more responsibility. When the startup grew, she asked me to come on full-time. I quit the diner, enrolled in night courses for digital marketing, and slowly, something shifted in me. Not overnight, but over long hours and longer doubts, I began to believe I could be more than the sum of my fears. 3 years passed like that. Quiet, steady growth. I built a small team under Rena, handled campaigns for clients I'd only ever seen on billboards before. I moved out of my mom's house and into a one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint but no yelling in the next room. I bought furniture secondhand and celebrated the day I could afford matching dishes. I didn't tell anyone back home. They hadn't asked and I didn't offer. But everything turned the day Rena got an offer she couldn't refuse, a massive merger deal with a tech firm based in LA. She wanted me to come with her as a partner. Not an assistant. A partner. I'd never even been on a plane before that, but I said yes before I could let the fear catch up to me. I packed what little I had, flew out with shaking hands, and landed in a city so bright it almost made me dizzy. The office we moved into had glass walls and espresso machines I didn't know how to use. The first month, I barely spoke in meetings. The second, I presented my first client pitch. By the sixth, I signed my name on a business registration form as co-founder. I still remember the pen shaking in my hand. Success didn't come with applause. It came with headaches, missed calls, and the quiet fear of failing loudly. But I learned. I learned how to negotiate, how to fire people gently, how to wake up after 3 hours of sleep and still show up. And with every decision, I buried a little more of the girl who used to cry on the roof of her broken house. 2 years into the business, we launched our own product, a tool that helps small creators manage brand deals more easily. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. And it exploded. Within a year, we had 200,000 users. A quiet acquisition offer came from a major player in the market. They wanted to buy us out. The number they offered didn't look real on paper. I remember sitting across from Rena at a sushi bar downtown as we stared at the figure. "Do we take it?" she asked. I looked out the window, thinking of all the nights I'd spent wondering if I'd ever be seen. "Yeah," I said. "We take it." The money hit my account on a Thursday morning. I checked it 3 times before I could breathe. I bought myself a new apartment first, then a car. Then I paid off my mother's medical debts anonymously. Not because I forgave everything, but because I needed to let something go. I didn't reach out to anyone else, especially not Mason. But life has a way of circling back, doesn't it? I didn't look for him. I didn't even think about him until one day I got a message request on an old social media account I barely used anymore. The name stopped me cold. Mason. "Hey," it said. "Long time. Saw your name in a post. You look amazing. Hope you're doing well." I didn't respond. But I didn't delete it either. Something in me stirred, like a page turning without permission. A week later, I got another message. "In town for a bit. Would love to catch up. Let me know if you want coffee." I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't feel anger, just curiosity, sharp and quiet. I typed back one word. "Sure." We met at a place downtown, high ceilings, latte art, the kind of place he probably wouldn't have noticed me in before. He looked older, still handsome in that polished, rehearsed way. But there was something in his eyes I didn't remember, hesitation. Regret, maybe. We talked. Light stuff. Jobs, people we used to know. He told me he'd gone into real estate, like his father, but things hadn't panned out. Market dipped. Lost a few big deals. Trying to rebuild. "You've done well," he said eventually. "Really well." I just smiled. He leaned forward slightly. "It's funny. Back in high school, I always thought you were kind of quiet. Like you disappear after graduation or something." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The conversation ended politely. He asked for my number. I gave him a fake one. I walked out and didn't look back. I thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. Because 2 months later, I woke up to find Mason standing outside the gates of my new house. Not a house, really. A mansion. One I never thought I'd own. 3 stories, white stone, vines trailing the walls like poetry. It had been a quiet purchase, done under an LLC. No one was supposed to know. But there he was, standing outside with his hands in his pockets, eyes red like he hadn't slept. And I stood inside, watching him through the glass. Not with fear, not with hatred, just with the quiet question echoing in my chest. What does someone like that want from someone like me now? He stood there for 10 full minutes, not moving, not knocking, just staring up at the windows like he wasn't sure if he'd actually come to the right place. I watched from behind the curtain, heart steady, not from calm but from something else, distance. This man had once told me I'd never be worth anything, and now he stood outside a home I had quietly built from the ground up with sleepless nights and a gut full of grit he never thought I possessed. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Just wary. Eventually, Mason turned away. He walked back down the long driveway, slow, like each step weighed more than the last. But I knew this wasn't the end. People like him didn't just show up without a reason. He would return. And when he did, I wanted to know exactly why. The next day, I had my assistant look into him. Nothing invasive. Just surface-level data. But what I got back surprised me. Mason wasn't just struggling, he was drowning. Bankrupt, multiple business deals gone wrong, and more than one pending lawsuit. He wasn't just back in town for nostalgia. He was hunting. For help. For money. For rescue. And maybe, in some twisted way, for me. 3 days later, he messaged again. I know how this looks. Please. I just want to talk. Face to face. Against my better judgment, or maybe because I needed to understand the why, I agreed. But this time, I chose the location. A public cafe, daylight, no illusions. I wore black, sharp lines, hair up, no softness. I didn't need to play the part of the girl he remembered. He was already there when I arrived. Same table as last time. Same tired smile. But this time he stood when he saw me, like some kind of apology was weighing down his spine. Thanks for coming, he said, voice lower. I didn't expect you to. Saturday, then why ask? He didn't flinch. Because I had nowhere else to go. He launched into a story. Business collapse. A partner who cleaned out accounts. A client who threatened to sue after a flipped property deal failed. He said it all like he was telling someone else's story, detached, as if repeating it enough would soften the sting. I listened. Not interrupting once. Then came the ask. I don't want money, he said. Just advice. Help getting back on my feet. I know you're smart. Always were. That part stung, not because it was cruel, but because of the years he'd spent pretending I didn't exist. Now my intelligence was convenient. I'm not your lifeline, I said finally. You had your chance to treat me like a human. You didn't. His jaw tightened, and for a second, I thought he might snap. But instead, he did something worse. He looked ashamed. I know what I said back then, he muttered. That hallway? I didn't mean it. I was just stupid. Showing off. That word, stupid, sounded so small now. Like it could undo years. Like it could stitch close something that had never healed. I left without promising anything. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Not from guilt, no, I didn't owe him anything. But something inside me had started to itch. A question I hadn't dared ask before. Why now? Why me? Why did Mason show up right as my name began climbing through industry circles? A week later, I had my answer. A journalist reached out, one who'd been sniffing around for a profile piece. She was polite but persistent. Said she had sources claiming my early funding came from a wealthy male backer, implying I had a hidden benefactor. I froze. That wasn't true. Every cent came from the exit deal with Rena's first company. My records were clean. But someone was planting doubt. The reporter mentioned an anonymous tip. I didn't have proof, not yet. But I had a sinking suspicion. The only person from my past who stood to gain from discrediting me now was Mason. I hired a private investigator, someone discreet and expensive. Within days, I had confirmation. Mason had reached out to 2 online forums, posing as a former friend, with claims about my success being engineered through unlisted investors. It was petty, insidious, and dangerous. In our world, reputation wasn't just image, it was currency. I could have confronted him. I could have blasted him online. But I didn't. because I wasn't that girl anymore. I didn't fight in hallways. I fought in boardrooms, with paper trails and silence that could split steel. Instead, I dug deeper. And what I found buried beneath the surface changed everything. Mason wasn't just broke. He was desperate in a way that made people dangerous. He owed money to someone serious, an investor with a trail of ruined men behind him. And worse, Mason had named me as a contact during a pitch meeting for a joint venture he never told me about. My name, my company, my reputation. He was trying to use me. Again. But this time not just to hurt me, but to save himself. I froze my credit, changed internal passwords, alerted my legal team. Quietly. No fanfare. No warning shots. I wanted him to feel the doors close one by one. A week later, I got a call from a woman named Elsie. She sounded nervous, but determined. "You don't know me," she said, "but I used to be with Mason. We were engaged. Until he used my name for a business deal and left me with a debt." Her voice cracked. "I thought you should know what he's capable of." I met her. I needed to. Elsie was soft-spoken, younger than me, and carried the same broken luck expression I remembered wearing years ago. She showed me the receipts, the forged documents, the angry emails. He'd done it before. He was doing it again. I wasn't special, just next. But now I had something he didn't. Power. I called him. One line. "Never contact me again. You're not just reckless. You're dangerous." And I hung up. But it didn't stop him. 3 nights later, I found him in my driveway again. But this time he was yelling. Not loud enough for the neighbors to come out, but loud enough for the cameras to catch it. He screamed that I owed him, that I used him, that I was a fraud. I watched from behind tinted glass, heart calm. My lawyer filed a restraining order the next morning. Mason disappeared. But the whispers didn't. The articles still came out, cleared me of wrongdoing, but left a taste of scandal in the air. The damage was minimal, but the bruise stayed. I almost thought that was the end. But then came the twist I didn't expect. Rena called me one evening, voice tight. "Check your inbox," she said. Now. A file sat there. Leaked emails. Dozens of them. Between Mason and a name I hadn't heard in years. Gary. My stepfather. The man who used to scream about dishes and money and silence. Turns out, Mason had found him, bought him drinks, asked him questions. And Gary, well, he'd never been loyal to anyone but himself. He'd told Mason everything. The nights I cried. The grades I faked. The money I never had. He even offered to testify that I had a history of mental instability. I read the emails, each line stabbing through years of work I thought had buried my past. But now I knew. This wasn't about Mason anymore. This was about every man who ever wanted to break me down into something they could manage. Every person who couldn't stand that I'd gotten out. Grown. 1. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I sat still for a long time. Then I wrote a message to my legal team. Prepare a formal defamation case. Both names. No merci. And I wrote another to the reporter. I have the real story now. And I'm ready to talk. The reporter's name was Maya Sinclair, a freelance journalist with a reputation for taking down tech titans and CEOs who had skeletons in manicured closets. Her pieces weren't just popular, they were gospel in certain circles. I hadn't planned to talk to the media. Not ever. But now, with the past crawling back through the cracks of my silence, I knew the only way forward wasn't through the courts. It was through the truth. My truth. We met in a quiet office she rented downtown, surrounded by boxes of clippings and a whiteboard littered with scribbles and red arrows. I expected her to be aggressive, maybe jaded. But she was sharp, calm, and deeply attentive. She didn't rush. She listened like a surgeon. I handed over the file I'd compiled. Emails from Mason, forged documents from Elsie, messages from Gary, even screenshots of social media threads that Mason had subtly planted. I'm not looking for revenge, I said. I'm looking for clarity. She nodded. Then we'll start with your voice. The piece took a week to build. We met every day, sometimes for hours, digging through timelines, cross-checking details. She verified everything. She reached out to Rena, who backed my story without hesitation. Elsie even agreed to speak on record, her voice shaking but firm. And I, for the first time in years, said everything. The hallway insult. The apartment I scrubbed floors to afford. The first deal. The betrayal. The ache of being underestimated for so long I started to believe it myself. When the article dropped, it was like lighting a match in a room soaked with gas. The headline read, "She built an empire. Now her past wants to burn it down." The opening paragraph quoted the words Mason once said to me in that high school hallway. The same ones that never stopped echoing. But this time, they were printed not as a wound, but as evidence. Of what I'd overcome. Of who I'd become. The article didn't beg for sympathy. It didn't paint me as a victim. It simply laid out the facts, sharp and undeniable. And the response? It was explosive. Within 24 hours, my inbox was flooded, not with pity, but with fury. Women from every corner of the internet shared their stories. People who'd been used, undermined, betrayed by those closest to them. Mason's name trended, but not how he wanted. Screenshots from former colleagues surfaced, revealing shady partnerships and failed ventures he'd tried to keep buried. Even an old classmate wrote a thread titled, "He Said the Same Thing to Me," detailing how Mason once sabotaged her college application out of spite. And Gary? That was the real twist. One of the reporters who read Maya's piece recognized Gary from a different case, a fraud case involving a fake veterans charity fund from years ago. He'd never been charged, but the connections were enough to reopen a dormant investigation. My mother called that night. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity still lived in my bones. "You didn't have to drag him through the mud," she said. Her voice wasn't angry, just weary.
Familiar.
Like all the years I spent trying to make her proud had collapsed into a single breath. "I didn't drag anyone," I said. "They brought the mud to me." She was quiet. Then, "You always were dramatic."
Click.
That was the last time we spoke. But something else happened after the article. Something unexpected. Rena called, voice almost breathless. "You need to come to the office." I hadn't been in for days. I'd been working remotely, letting the storm clear. When I arrived, there was a man waiting in the conference room. Silver-haired, clean-cut, expensive suit. He introduced himself as the head of a venture capital group based in Europe. He slid a folder across the table. "We read your story," he said. "We've been watching the backlash, but also the resilience. You didn't fold. You strategized. That's rare." I opened the folder. It was a funding proposal. Massive. They wanted me to launch a new venture under my own name. Full autonomy. They weren't interested in Rena's company. They wanted me. My story. My leadership. I felt the heat rise in my chest, not from ego, but from the disbelief that someone had finally looked at me, not through the lens of pity, not through the shadow of my past, but clearly. I didn't say yes. Not immediately. I took the folder home, sat with it on the marble countertop in my kitchen, and stared at it for hours. My life had already changed, but this would be another kind of leap. That night, as if on cue, Mason messaged me again. This time it wasn't threatening. It was something worse. "I'm sorry," he wrote. "You were always better than me. I see that now. I lost everything. I don't know who I am anymore." I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. The next day, I signed the deal. We launched the new venture 3 months later. I called it Anchor because I wanted it to be something that grounded people instead of exploiting them. We hired slow.
Chose carefully.
My name was on every contract. No more shadows. No more whispers. And then, the final twist. On the day of our public launch, a letter arrived. Handwritten. The envelope had no return address, but I recognized the handwriting. My sister's. We hadn't spoken in nearly a decade. She'd moved away young, had kids, started a life I barely knew. The letter was short. I read everything. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I should have stood up for you. If you ever want to talk, I'd like to try.
I always knew you'd be something.
We just weren't allowed to say it. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I placed the letter in my desk drawer, not because I was ready to forgive, but because I was ready to decide on my terms. That night, as I stood on the balcony of my home, the one they all once said I didn't deserve, I saw him again. Mason, standing across the street, not yelling, not begging, just standing there. He looked up once, as if hoping I'd meet his gaze.
I didn't.
I turned, walked inside, and closed the door. Not to punish him, not to feel powerful, but because finally, I didn't need him to see me anymore. I already knew who I was. The night I turned away from Mason for the last time, I thought the final chapter had quietly closed behind me. But history has a habit of lingering in corners, like dust. You think it's gone until sunlight hits the room just right, and you see all of it again.
Clearer.
Sharper. Anchor was growing. In under 6 months, we'd onboard over 100 clients. Not all big names, some were small, grassroots businesses. But they mattered. We weren't just a company. We were a signal to people who'd been dismissed, just like I had been, that their stories could lead something powerful. But peace doesn't last long when you come from chaos. It waits just long enough for you to start believing in it, and then it tests your grip. Mine came in the form of an anonymous email. Subject line: "You missed something." Attached was a single file, one of our internal presentations, marked confidential, with our pitch outline, projections, and brand voice strategy. My chest went still. I forwarded it to my head of operations, and within hours, we confirmed it. The leak was real. Someone on the inside had shared proprietary data, and now it was floating in obscure forums where startup competitors scraped for anything they could weaponize. I froze salaries, locked down systems. No one was fired immediately, but audits were launched. Quiet, controlled.
I didn't want panic.
I wanted answers. The breach was traced to a login from a shared workspace downtown. Not our headquarters. Not even one of our usual satellite hubs. Just a random rented booth on the edge of the city. That's when I remembered something. 2 weeks earlier, I'd seen a name on our supplier list that hadn't registered at the time. Stone and Finch Consulting. A minor services invoice. Looked like back-end testing. Seemed harmless. Except that company didn't exist. Not in any real capacity. And when my team dug into the LLC registration, the address matched a building in a rundown part of town, an old post office converted into shared units. And then I saw it. Registered agent, Gary Linwood. My stepfather. The same man who had let Mason twist pieces of my life into weapons. I stared at the screen for a long time. My stomach didn't drop. My heart didn't race. It just stopped. I remembered being 10 years old, hiding behind the kitchen door while he yelled about a scratch on the car. I remembered his face, red and trembling, and my mother whispering, "Don't make him angry. Just say sorry." I remembered apologizing for things I hadn't done. That's what this was. The final echo of that voice. I didn't call him. I sent my attorney. Within days, a cease and desist landed on his desk, along with notice of pending charges for data fraud, corporate sabotage, and breach of confidentiality. The evidence was airtight. I didn't wait for a reaction. He wouldn't get the chance to twist it into another story where I was ungrateful or dramatic or dangerous. I wasn't his child anymore. I was a name on a door he'd never walk through again. But it didn't end there. Someone else had seen the leak. Someone watching quietly. From the dark. I got another message 2 days later. This one came with a video clip. Security footage from inside the shared workspace. A man walking in, hoodie pulled up, sunglasses on indoors, posture familiar. Slouched. Slightly arrogant. Like the world still owed him something. Mason. He hadn't just dragged Gary back into the mess. He'd orchestrated the entire thing. I sat in my office late at night, the city lights buzzing through the windows, watching the footage on loop. I didn't feel angry. I felt insulted. After everything. After the lies, the smear attempts, the silence he'd tried to enforce, he still thought he could break me from the inside. I had choices. I could press full criminal charges. I could go public again. I could ruin what was left of him. But part of me hesitated. Not from doubt. From calculation. Because I finally understood something he never would. Power doesn't always speak. Sometimes it just waits. So I made a move he never saw coming. I invited him to a meeting. Not as a friend.
Not as an olive branch.
As a setup. The location was precise. An upscale hotel with a rooftop bar, mirrored glass, and just enough media buzz to draw attention if anything went wrong. He arrived exactly on time. That always was his thing. Control masked his charm. He looked thinner, worn, but still tried to smile like we were just old classmates catching up. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. I know everything, I said.
Gary.
The leak. The emails. The fake consulting firm. His face cracked for a split second. Then came the performance. You don't understand. He said you'd forgive me if I just... No, I said. You thought I'd be too scared to act. You thought I'd stay the girl in the hallway. He leaned back, face hardening. You think this power makes you untouchable? People love a downfall. Especially when it's someone like you.
Someone like me.
That line was supposed to sting. But it didn't. Because he was right and still wrong. Yes, people watched for cracks in success. But I wasn't just successful. I was steady. I didn't just build a brand. I built armor. I slid a folder across the table. This is the full file. Legal action starts Monday. Unless, he perked up. You sign everything in here. A full admission. Statement of wrongdoing. And you walk away. Forever. From me. From my company.
From this industry.
Your face doesn't appear in another article, another blog post, another whispered rumor.
Not one.
You go silent. You disappear.
He scoffed.
Or what? I looked up. I didn't blink. Or I make you infamous. He sat there, jaw clenched, eyes darting like he was searching for a way out that didn't exist. Eventually, he picked up the pen.
And signed.
I watched him leave the building, a shadow shrinking into the blur of traffic. I never saw him again. Anchor recovered. Stronger than before. Because now we weren't just a business. We were a warning. We were what happened when you underestimated someone for too long. But that wasn't the end. Not yet. Because a month later, I received one final envelope. From the state probate office. Inside was a letter. My mother had passed. No will.
No will be.
Just a single item marked under my name, an old jewelry box. I didn't want it. I didn't need it. But I picked it up anyway. At home, I opened it slowly. Inside was a necklace I hadn't seen in 20 years. Cheap silver. The kind you win at a carnival. I'd worn it as a child until Gary told me it made me look pathetic. There was a note underneath. Just one line, scribbled in fading ink. You were always the strong one. I just didn't know how to say it. I didn't cry, but I closed the box, gently, and placed it on the shelf above my desk. Not for her. For me. The past didn't know me anymore. It just reminded me who I'd become. And I was far from finished. The jewelry box sat on my shelf for weeks. I didn't touch it after that first moment. I didn't need to. It wasn't about what was inside. It was the space it now occupied. Small, quiet, and finally not full of shame. I'd spent most of my life learning to survive silence, but now I was beginning to understand that silence, when chosen, could be strength. Anchor flourished.
Client doubled.
We moved into a larger space overlooking the city, not glass and marble like some overdone tech fantasy, but warm and efficient. I built it to feel like oxygen. Every wall, every window, every voice inside reminded me that this was something I made, not for approval, not for validation, but because I could. But even peace has weight, and mine came in the form of a voicemail I wasn't expecting. Hey, Lila. It's Elsie. I didn't know who else to call. Her voice was thin, trembling, and the message didn't last more than 20 seconds. She didn't say what was wrong, just that she was scared. That Mason had found her again. That he was blaming her now, spinning new lies like old habits. I didn't hesitate. I found her at a small apartment above a flower shop, crouched on the floor with her back to the wall. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but emotionally. Like something had closed inside her. She didn't need to explain. I'd lived in that quiet fear once. The one where you expect every knock to be an accusation. I can't go through this again, she whispered. I didn't offer her comfort. I offered her power. You're not alone this time. I brought in my legal team. I had them file a joint motion, harassment, coercion, emotional abuse. This time we weren't just defending ourselves. We were going on the offensive. Within weeks, we had a hearing date. Mason didn't show. His attorney did, and tried to negotiate some deal behind closed doors, but I refused. We presented the evidence. Emails, statements, the surveillance footage from the data breach, the signed confession. And then we handed the floor to Elsie. She stood on shaking legs, voice breaking once or twice, but every word hit like iron. When the judge issued the restraining order, there was no applause. Just breath. Finally released. That day, Elsie hugged me like someone who'd been drowning and just remembered how to float. You saved me, she said. I shook my head.
No.
You just needed someone to tell you you were worth saving. Back at home that night, I stood on the balcony, overlooking the city I now called mine. And for the first time in years, I thought of that hallway again. The one where I picked up my books while a boy with too much confidence and too little kindness told me I'd never be anything. He had no idea he was speaking a prophecy into the wrong person. Because I didn't disappear. I didn't fall. I rose, slowly, painfully, deliberately. And then came the final twist. One I never saw coming. A package arrived, no label, no name. Just a return address from a correctional facility in another state. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a letter. From Gary. Written in his handwriting, no mistaking it this time. The words were uneven, scratched like he didn't know how to apologize without trying to sound like a victim. I'm in here for something else, he wrote. They caught up with me, but I heard about what happened. And I want you to know I wasn't angry because you failed. I was angry because you succeeded. Because you reminded me of every risk I never took. You were always too bright for that house. I tried to dim it. I failed. There was no I'm sorry.
No repentance.
Just recognition. I didn't write back. But I did keep the letter. Not because I forgave him, but because sometimes even the worst people leave behind proof of your strength. The mansion wasn't the ending. It never was. It was just the beginning of what happened when I stopped trying to earn my place at other people's tables and built my own. A year after the final hearing, I started a new program inside Anchor. A foundation. One dedicated to women starting over after financial abuse. Not just with money, but with education, shelter, and legal protection. I named it the Folded Chair Project because I remembered that Sunday dinner. I remembered sitting in that cold, metal folding chair while everyone else had a cushion. I remembered how it felt to be told, quietly, that you didn't belong, even in the place where you were born. And now, I'd build chairs for those who'd been told the same. No one would be folded to the end of the table again, not on my watch. On the day of our foundation launch, the press asked the usual questions. About business, about success, about the viral article that had once defined me. But one journalist asked something different. What would you say to the version of yourself from 10 years ago? I didn't hesitate. I'd say, you were never too much. They were just too small. That night, alone in my kitchen, I pulled out my journal. The one that had followed me through every version of myself. Diner waitress, invisible daughter, reluctant fighter, quiet builder. And I wrote the final page. Not in anger. Not in pain, but in truth. I don't need to be louder. I don't need to be meaner. I don't need to prove anything anymore. Because I remember who I am, even when they tried to make me forget. I remember the girl with the split backpack and scraped knees and quiet dreams that no one thought would ever bloom. She was enough. I was enough. And now I am everything they said I couldn't be. Not to spite them, but because I chose to rise anyway. And as I turned off the light, the mansion didn't feel cold anymore. It felt earned. Not as revenge, but as a reminder. You don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to stop asking permission to speak. And that was the moment I finally, truly let go.